Greetings from Paranormal M, the channel that brings you stories that'll make you question everything. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss out on our latest thought-provoking tales. We hope you enjoy. Let me tell you about the haunted house my family and I used to live in back when we resided in Woodbridge, Ontario. The home was old, creaky, and had clearly seen better days. In fact, it was even starting to sink on one side, resulting in a noticeable tilt that would cause a ball to roll across the floor if set down, and prevented my bedroom door from really being able to close all the way. As if that wasn't eerie enough, things really started to take a turn for the paranormal at night. Specifically, I would hear the hallway closet door open, which had an old metal latch style that would swing open and then slam shut, followed by the sound of someone wearing slippers shuffling down the hallway. They would do a loop through my room and then exit. To make matters worse, my dog used to sleep at the bottom bunk of my bed, and he would get up and growl until the entity had disappeared. This was a nightly occurrence, too. My sister and I also began to notice an influx of gross centipede bugs that made loud clicking noises. What's more is every time we tried to squish one, it would simply disappear. And one time we managed to squash one in my room, and suddenly everything went weird in slow motion, red and wonky, as if someone was stretching and pulling the entire room. When it finally stopped, my sister just left my room, and we only talked about it years later. But the scariest incident, by far, was when we were watching TV one evening, and suddenly the screen went to static. In a flash, every single door and window in the house slammed shut at once, even my own bedroom door that was previously unable to close. This caused a huge scratch in the wood floor that we had to remove from the hinges to open again. It was absolutely terrifying, and it didn't stop there. The taps and the toilet would often flush and turn on and off by themselves, adding to the overall sense of unease in the house. And when we finally decided to rip up the carpet in the living room, we discovered a cellar underneath. Now, this was pretty normal for Ontario homes to have tornado shelters, but this one had a dugout in the back that was filled with broken mirrors. We couldn't even begin to imagine what that was all about. As a result of all these spooky happenings, my sister and I were never comfortable in the house. It always felt very unusual and dark. We constantly felt. Sometimes I would even do my homework outside or climb out my window and read on the roof until my mom got home from work around 6. Although I'm sure there are many more eerie occurrences that I'm forgetting, it's safe to say that our 6 months in that haunted house were anything but dull, and eventually the house got ripped down, making way for condos that now stand in its place. You guys ever hear the old hag syndrome, or perhaps sleep paralysis? For years, I had no idea it had a name, as it happened to me when I was 15, and that was back in the year 2000. It started with a trend of sleep paralysis, back to back, night after night. And one time, I even heard a voice speaking to me in a different language. Fast forward to like a week later, my little nephew, back then, who was 8 years old, we were getting ready for bed, and it was night, and we both had school. Well, he was in the shower, and I was on the phone. He comes out of the shower, scared and pale, and tells me, "Can I sleep in your room?" Some voice was talking to me in the shower. It was a different language. I had told no one about the things that were happening to me, so I was shocked when he told me that. Plus, he hated sleeping in my bed. I would troll him all night, so I knew that it had to be serious for him to want to sleep in my room. That same night, the actual old lady I kept seeing in my dreams appeared in front of me. At first, she was brushing her old, shriveled, dry white hair with a brush in front of the mirror. She was old and wrinkled and so hideous and short. but with that weird hell-speak voice. Immediately, I tried to get up, but I couldn't. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out of my mouth. From the mirrors, she teleported to the side of my bed, and she grabbed my arms with her old, bony hand. I felt cold and scared, and she kept telling me to go with her. I couldn't scream, but I kept not letting my head say no, nodding it. My nephew kept moving and shaking as if he was trying to help, but he couldn't. Maybe he was having some sort of epileptic attack, which he had never had before. I couldn't reach out to him, and I couldn't help, and hours passed, and I kept seeing the clock go from 1:40 a.m. with all kinds of creatures coming out of the shadows behind her. Finally, at 5:30 a.m., my sister woke up because she couldn't sleep and she felt really weird. She went to the kitchen to get some water. She put the glass on the ice dispenser on the fridge, and 2 fucking cockroaches come out of there, and she drops the glass and screamed. The scream made everything go away. Our house does have a few roaches in it, so having a roach in our fridge's ice cream dispenser was not normal. After that, they never went full apparition. My dreams kept getting really fucked up, and every night it seemed like a demonic nightmare. And for years, no quiet night, no good dream, until I was about 21. It was awful. I dreaded the night coming. And now I'm a night person. I can't function in the day. When I hear about the sleep paralysis and the whole science definition, I really dismiss it. I love science, and I understand that there must be a way to explain what you can't understand. But sleep paralysis has been around too long, and it's been documented for hundreds of years. It's ominous and terrifying. There's more to it than what science can explain. The weirdest thing happened to me the other day. It was a dark and stormy night, and the protagonist had just drifted off to sleep with their trusty canine companion by her side. She had been listening to her favorite podcast through her trusty AirPods, a habit that had helped her fall asleep more easily. However, something strange happened in the wee hours of the morning that shook her to her core. At around 4 a.m., the protagonist awoke to find that her phone call with her boyfriend had abruptly ended. She was disoriented and confused, wondering why he had hung up on her without warning. She quickly texted him, eager to get to the bottom of this mysterious development. To her surprise, her boyfriend responds, and it was even more unsettled by the sudden hang-up. He explained that he had heard a woman screaming in the background, as if she were being violently attacked or murdered. He had initially thought that it might be the protagonist, but upon closer inspection, he realized that it couldn't be her. She wasn't even facing toward the phone, and the scream sounded too close to be coming from anywhere else in the apartment. He had also ruled out the possibility that it was the protagonist's mother who lived across the way, as the scream was too loud and intense for that to be the case. She was left feeling deeply disturbed by this news. She had no idea what could have caused such a blood-curdling scream to emanate from her apartment in the middle of the night. Could it have been a home invasion? A murder taking place right under her nose? Or was it something even more supernatural in nature? Despite her fears, she never did get to the bottom of what had happened that fateful night. The incident remained a mystery, haunting her for years to come. She eventually moved out, though, but the memory of that bone-chilling scream stayed with her for the rest of her days. Little old lady. As the warm sun shone down on our backs, we unloaded the final box from the moving truck and looked up at our new home. It was a quaint bungalow with a charming exterior and a cozy atmosphere. It had been previously owned by an elderly lady who had lived here alone for years, before moving to long-term care 2 years ago. According to the locals, she had passed away last summer. Despite the sadness surrounding the previous owner's fate, there was a palpable sense of warmth and love emanating from the walls and the house. As we stepped inside, we were greeted with the sight of all the furniture and kitchen supplies that the previous owner had left behind. It was as if she had lovingly prepared the house for its next inhabitants. We quickly settled into our new home and felt like we had always belonged here. Our toddler ran around the house giggling with delight as he explored every nook and cranny. However, strange things began to happen soon after we moved in. One night while I was brushing my hair in the bathroom at the back of the house, I felt a sudden tug on the back of my shirt. It wasn't forceful, but it was enough to make me stop in my tracks and turn around to see who or what was touching me. But there was no one there. The incident shook me up, but I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. However, last week I experienced something even more unsettling. After taking a shower, I noticed a handprint on the wall above the towel rack that had not been there before. It was the wrong size to be either mine or my fiance's, and it was too distinct to have been caused by condensation or steam. These events left me feeling uneasy and unsure about what to make of them. Was it just my imagination playing tricks on me, or was there something more sinister at play? Only time will tell, but for now, we are content in our cozy little bungalow, hoping that whatever is causing these strange occurrences will soon leave us in peace. Grams came to say goodbye. The tale I'm about to recount is not one of grandiosity or of epic proportions, but rather a small tale of an enduring nature of familial love and the solace that it can bring, even in the darkest of moments. It's a story of loss, but also hope, of grief, but also of peace, and the sadness, but also joy. It was about a month ago that my dear sweet grandma passed away. She had lived a long and fulfilling life, having seen so much change and transformation in the world around her, but her passing was still a profound loss for all who knew her and loved her. And to make matters even more difficult, it was only a week after my dad had passed away as well, so we were all still reeling from that. In those early days after Grandma's passing, I was consumed by a deep sense of sadness and loss. It was hard to imagine a world without her in it, a world where I could just pick up the phone and hear her sweet, reassuring voice on the other end. And yet, in the midst of all this pain, I had a dream that brought me a measure of comfort and solace. In my dream, I saw my grandma as though through a hazy film, her image distorted and indistinct. But even in this state, she seemed to be telling me that this wouldn't do, that she needed to be closer to me. And then, as if by some miraculous intervention, she simply cut through the haze and came to me, as real and present as she'd ever been. In that moment, all the sadness and grief that had been weighing me down just lifted away. My grandma was so happy and excited to see me and talk to me, and to plan all sorts of new adventures together. She insisted that we go find her address so we could embark on this journey in style. And as we talked and laughed and dreamed together, I knew in my heart that everything was going to be okay. When I woke from that dream, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in weeks. It was like my grandma had come to me and told me she was okay and that she was watching over me and that she was happy and at peace. And even though it was just a dream, the comfort and reassurance that it brought me was immeasurable. So in the end, this isn't a long story, nor is it a grand one, but it's a story of love and loss and grief and hope, and the enduring bonds that tie us all together. And even though my grandma's no longer with us in the physical sense, I know that her spirit lives on and that she's still watching over us, still guiding us, and still loving us just as she always did. Has anyone else experienced this? The tale I'm about to share is one that defies explanation and challenges the limits of our understanding of the world around us. It's a story that may seem unbelievable to some, but to those who've experienced something similar, it's a testament to the strange and mysterious forces that can sometimes shape our lives. It all started one day when I was at work in the coffee aisle of a grocery store. I had a box of Hostess ding-dongs that I needed to put on the shelf, but there were too many customers in the aisle, so I just stood by my cart waiting for some of them to leave. But that's when I saw him. At the end of an aisle about 20 feet away from me, there was a man just standing there, staring in my direction, and at first I didn't think anything of it. Maybe he was just waiting for someone or trying to find a particular item, but then something strange happened. I looked behind me to see if there was anyone standing there, but no one. And when I looked back at the man, his eyes were a different color, almost like they were glowing. They were a bright, fiery quality, like they were made of magma or some otherworldly substance. I stood there, frozen, staring at him for a minute and unable to look away. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the fiery glow in his eyes faded away, and then they were just normal, dark brown. The man walked past me to the Hostess donuts, grabbed his chin, in thought perhaps, and smiled. I couldn't shake the feeling that something strange had just happened, like I had witnessed something that defied explanation. Was it just my imagination? Had I somehow hallucinated the man's eyes? Or was there something more, maybe going on there? As I pondered these questions, I couldn't help but wonder if anyone else had experienced anything like this. Has anyone else seen someone with eyes that maybe glowed in an otherworldly light? Was this a common phenomenon that I had just never heard of before? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that there were countless mysteries and wonders in the world around us, things that we couldn't explain or understand. And while it might be tempting to dismiss these experiences as mere hallucinations or flights of fancy, I knew deep down that there was something more to this encounter, something that defied easy explanation. In the end, this is a story of mystery and wonder, of the strange and unexplainable forces that shape our lives and our world. It may be hard to believe, but for those who've experienced something similar, it's a reminder that there's more to our existence than we can ever hope to understand. The Haunting of the Manila Film Center. Revered as one of the most haunted places in the Philippines, the Manila Film Center has played host to a horrific tragedy during the years of its construction, supposedly filling itself with restless spirits of those who died inside. Apart from being a paranormal hub, the building also serves as a chilling reminder to an incredibly dark period of history for the Philippines. In January of 1981, the Philippines government announced that a large amount of funding had been set aside for an extensive national media project. The proposal was put forth by the First Lady at the time, Imelda Marcos, who was specifically designed to raise a global profile of the country's film industry. It involved the creation of a new international film festival, the foundation of a laboratory to develop new filming techniques, and the creation of a permanent film archive. Key to the success of the whole program would be a national media culture constructed in the heart of the capital, which would play host to all other individual components. In order to stay within the $25 million budget and meet the date of the new film festival, the construction had been completed within 12 months. While the proposals initially instilled enthusiasm, doubts surrounding the predicted cost and timeframes were soon raised. Ignoring the critics, Betty Benitez, the project leader, announced that the employment of 4,000 laborers who immediately kick-started the construction of the media center. Continually working in 3 shifts over a rolling 24-hour period, the workforce quickly silenced those skeptical of the timeline. The building's main lobby, whose originally proposed completion time had been set 6 weeks, was ultimately completed within a mere 72 hours. However, as the project was nearing completion, the dangers inherent in working at such a place would be brutally exposed. On the 17th of November, 1981, at around 3 a.m., several of the building's newly constructed upper floors collapsed, along with the temporary reinforcement which had been in place to support them. A large number of workers either fell to their deaths, became impaled upon the jagged metal remains, or were crushed beneath the falling debris. The collapse had been caused by miscalculation in the amount of concrete which had to be poured the previous evening, and as the ZzReverze workers ran to help, another danger presented itself. In addition to having been too heavy for the scaffolding to support, the excess concrete had also not been able to dry quickly, thus trapping the would-be rescuers by hardening around their legs. Upon her arrival to the site, Benitez had quickly ordered the military to secure the scene and had soon enforced a total media blackout. Rather than initiating rescue of the dead and the dying, she firmly established her intent of resuming the construction as soon as possible. Trapped limbs were severed, while the stuck workers screamed in pain and their rudimentary tourniquets failed to stop their bleeding. The bodies, which were deemed too difficult to retrieve, were dismembered or left in the mess, while fresh concrete was quickly poured over them. Despite the death of 170 workers, construction quickly resumed. As a result of the brutality, the center was open in time for its maiden film festival, which took place during the final week of January 1982. Unbeknownst to those in attendance, they were walking on the foundations that contained the remains of those who had died during the construction. Almost immediately, tales of mysterious happenings which were taking place during the film festival began circulating among the members of the local community. The organizers received calls from a number of female visitors who claimed that their dresses had been stained wet with concrete, or in some cases blood. These claims caused a number of checks on the building, but no visible weaknesses in the concrete could be found. Furthermore, ambulances were called to attend some of the guests who had suffered temporary medical episodes. Several visitors reported feeling extreme and overwhelming chills, which incapacitated them for a short period of time. In other cases, attendees stated that they were experiencing a sudden and overpowering crushing sensation on their chests. These visitors had fallen to the ground, screaming that they were being pinned, before the symptoms quickly dissipated. The disturbing reports caused Betty Benitez to close the building for one evening before quickly arranging for several priests to attend the site. These holy men were instructed to eradicate whatever was inducing fear and suffering in those attending the film festival. The priests left the following morning, claiming that they had done all they could do to silence the spirits of the victims of the building and refused to stay any longer. Following the priest's visit, another bizarre incident reportedly transpired. As the cleaning crews were tidying up from the day's events after closing, several armed men allegedly arrived at the site. It was explained that these were members of the president's support group, clearing the building ahead of the visit from the First Lady, which was taking place the following morning. Soon after the arrival of the security staff, there had been a sudden commotion, causing them to herd into the theater at gunpoint. A head count was carried out before the armed men demanded the source of the noise to step out. The demands paved way for a distressed agent who claimed to have caught sight of a movement in the darkness of the lower levels of the building. On issuing a challenge, the man had observed a shadowy figure running away. He immediately drew his weapon and chased it along several corridors, before it suddenly disappeared directly through a closed door. Approaching the doorway with a torch and a sidearm in hand, the agent tried the door handle but found out it was locked. Calling for backup, though, using his radio, he kicked the door open and burst into the room, only to find that it was completely empty. Then he heard the whisper of dismembered and hushed voices, seemingly emanating out of nowhere. The eerie voice had just whispered, "Help," As more arrived to assist them, they found their colleague backed into a dark corner of an empty room, waving his gun from side to side in fear. Aftermath. Despite these disconcerting events, the center's maiden film festival was deemed to be a success, having been attended by renowned celebrities from all over the world. It also led to a commendable expansion of the country's native film industry, with movies exported to others, and several awards being received by the country's actors. The success, however, would be somewhat short-lived, as the government significantly reduced the funding for the film festival. As a result of this decision, the building would go into an abandonment for a lengthy period, where the after effects of poor construction techniques came to the forefront. Along with her creation, Betty would also become the victim of a harrowing misfortune. One evening while returning from home from her office, Betty's car had been left in a carriageway and collided with an adjoining wall. When police later arrived at the scene, the man who had been driving her vehicle was found completely uninjured. Betty, however, had been crushed to death by the vehicle's crumpled interior. Following a major earthquake in the summer of 1990, the Manila Film Center was abandoned altogether, standing unoccupied for many years. During this period, groups of local youth frequented the site, exploring the vacant theaters and seeing if anything valuable had been left behind. One such group snuck inside the building during broad daylight hours and began to look around deserted corridors. As the boys ventured deeper into the media center's interior, the temperature around them dropped rapidly. The illuminating sunlight seeping through the broken window above had gradually dimmed until they could only see just a few feet in front of them. Amidst the swallowing darkness, the group noticed what seemed to be a viscous liquid flowing down the walls on either side of them. Moving closer, they realized that the material was wet concrete, with the main panel of the walls appearing to be in the process of melting and dripping down into the corridor below. A sudden chilling scream caught the attention of the member of the group, guiding his gaze to one of their numbers, staring down at the ground below him in complete shock. Tracing the boy's gaze, they were horrified to see a human arm reaching up out of solid concrete, with its hand wrapped tightly around the boy's leg. The dismembered limb was stained with blood where it had apparently been amputated from the body, with portions of gray bone exposed and covered by drying cement. Shrieking in terror, the boy had jolted himself free from its grasp before fleeing the building with the rest of his friends. After they had put the dreaded building several miles behind, the group had finally come to a stop to regulate their pacing breath. As the other watched in horror, the aforementioned boy who had pulled up his leg, he revealed a series of livid and purplish bruises on his skin, outlining a human handprint. As of 2001, it was nearing its closure. The Manila Film Center reinitiated its role as an entertainment hub. In December of that year, it was leased by Amazing Philippines Theater, which frequently used it to perform shows. During this relatively successful run, rumors of new ghosts started to circulate within the city. The entity had appeared to take up residence within the haunted building. Soon after the beginning of the amazing show, the body of a young female performer was discovered on one of the steps of the Manila Film Center. While the limited and unsuccessful police investigation revealed nothing concrete, the detectives believed that the case could be connected to drugs. And from this point onwards, the apparition of an unknown source has often been sighted in and around the building, causing rehearsals or live shows to be halted on several occasions. The sightings of this specter were not limited to the building's interior. Several taxi drivers have reported encountering the dead woman outside the building. On multiple occasions, passing cabs have been flagged down by an unknown female with minor injuries, standing outside the haunted building in the early hours of morning. The lone and upset passenger would then ask the driver if he will take them to a local hospital to treat her injuries, but at some point during the journey, sometimes in the middle of a conversation, the injured woman would just vanish into thin air. Conclusion. Ever since the time of the Manila Film Center disaster, the Marcos regime firmly denied that any of the workers had been buried within the building's foundations. However, with no reliable records, it proved impossible to verify their claims, even after they were removed from power. Furthermore, testimony from the families of the workers and photos taken by journalists who had access to the scene suggest that many laborers indeed lost their lives, strengthening the building's foundations with their own blood. The stories that have emerged from the building over the years seemingly suggest the same thing. The souls of the victims who were subjected to a dictatorial brutality during the dreadful incident have lingered in the building, forever trapped within its layers of concrete and praying for help at every possible chance. The Pontefract Poltergeist. In September 1954, Bill Farah and his wife Barbara moved into 30 East Drive in the market town of Pontefract, England. The 3-bedroomed property made the ideal home for the couple and their 2-year-old daughter Jane, but in less than a year they moved out, convincing a second family, the Pritchards, to swap houses with them. The Farahs were terrified of the house. Objects randomly moved of their own accord, voices were heard echoing in empty rooms, and rips and tears mysteriously appeared on soft furnishings. Jane would often be found crying with her face inexplicably covered in blood and scratches, causing Bill and Barbara to fear for their daughter's safety. The family had no pets to account for the injuries. The worried parents placed cotton mitts over the girls' little hands, but the bloody wounds continued to appear, leaving them utterly confused as what to do next. One day, when Barbara rushed upstairs in response to her child's crying, she found a pillow pressed up against her face. This event proved to be the tipping point for the family, and it forced them to flee, leaving the house and their dark co-inhabitant with the Pritchard family. Thus, marking the lesser-known origins of what would soon become the infamous case of the 30 East Drive poltergeist and the Black Monk of Pontefract. Accounts of the Pritchard family. Over the years, much has been said and written about East 30 Drive. Regarded as a classic British case of poltergeist phenomena, it has been investigated via visits to the property by a multitude of paranormal investigation teams. One of the most significant visits to East 30 Drive took place decades earlier, in August 1980, when Colin Wilson, a well-known writer, visited the long-suffering Pritchard family. Wilson had been tipped off by a local amateur historian, Tom. The man had stumbled across newspaper clippings dating back to the 1960s, claiming that a Pontefract family had experienced poltergeist phenomena caused by the spirit of a 16th century monk. The Black Monk had allegedly been executed for assaulting and murdering several young female victims. Discovering that the family was still living in the same house, Tom decided to visit them and hear their testimonies. Soon afterwards, he contacted Colin Wilson, requesting him to be his associate. Wilson eventually accepted his offer, thus journeying to the town to interview the family. In line with Colin Wilson's book about the haunting, after the house swap and until August 1966, the Pritchard family, comprising of a mother, father, son, and daughter, lived in 30 East Drive in relative peace. It was a Thursday, and Joe Pritchard, his wife Jean, and their 12-year-old daughter Diane were away on a holiday in Devon. They had left their 15-year-old son Philip in the care of Sarah, Jean's mother, at the house. The arrangement to begin with, at least, seemed to suit the family perfectly. Philip had reached the age when holidays with the family lose their attraction, and so spent much of his time happily reading in the garden. Beginnings of the paranormal. On that fateful Thursday, Philip had been outside as such before returning indoors to make himself a drink. On his way, he noticed something peculiar, a a cloud of gray-white dust floated in the air around his oblivious grandmother, who had been sitting in the living room while being engrossed in her knitting. The chalk-like powder appeared to be falling not from the ceiling, but from a level below Philip's head. The top half of the room was perfectly clear, thus suggesting that the curious dust had been materializing from nothing. When Sarah enlisted the help of her other daughter, Mary Kelly, to clean it up, they found more strangeness in the kitchen. The duo had discovered several large pools of water on the floor, seemingly having no origin or explanation. As the younger woman tried to mop up the kitchen, new puddles had supposedly manifested. Pulling up the linoleum revealed no leak underneath, and neither was water falling from above. Meanwhile, the dust in the living room had continued to fall like a miniature snowstorm, with a fine white layer of the unidentifiable material having formed on the furniture and on top of the cup of tea Philip had made for his grandmother. The house's water supply was turned off by a helpful neighbor before the water company was called to the property. Pipes were checked, the linoleum was once again lifted, and drains were examined, but they couldn't find breakage or blockage. Thus, some sort of condensation caused the summer's weather, and it was maybe the water company's best explanation. About an hour after a man left, the mysterious puddles stopped appearing. Before the day was over, however, more odd happenings were reported. Sugar and tea leaves were emptied from their dispensers in the kitchen and sprinkled all over the countertops. Cupboards vibrated and shook. Loud bangs were heard coming from upstairs, and a plant, usually located at the foot of the staircase, was transported halfway up, minus its pot. The flower pot somehow had been moved separately, being found on the landing above. Unable to tolerate the house any longer, Philip and his grandmother left and slept at Marie's house for the night. Marie's husband, supposedly unhappy with the strange situation, is described as phoning the police to have them check on the house. Everything seemed to be normal inside the house. He found no sign of an intruder or anything out of the ordinary. Yet around midnight, just as he left the house for the final time that day, 2 small paintings are said to have fallen from the wall, with the glass being shattered on one of Jean and Joe Pritchard's wedding photos. It had also, so it's alleged, been slashed from end to end, as if with a sharp knife. When Jean, Joe, and Diane returned from their holiday, Sarah recounted the unsettling happenings. While they were initially displaying disbelief, they were forced to change their initial stand after they heard 3 loud, distinct bangs and an uncharacteristically cold wind which blew through the house while Sarah briefed them. After this event, the activity disappeared for the next 2 years. Resumption. According to the testimonies recorded by Colin Wilson, the activity at 30 East Drive truly began for the Pritchards in 1968. The strangeness seemed to be restarted when Jean decided to redecorate her daughter's bedroom. Mysterious temperature changes were reported along with inexplicable bangs and knocks. Allegedly, a paintbrush was flung across the room by unforeseen hands, supposedly missing Jean's face by only a fraction of an inch. Furthermore, Mrs. Pritchard claims to witness, in the dim of the night as she went to the bathroom, a long strip of wallpaper standing on end and swaying like a cobra. When she went to grab it, it fell to the floor before flying into the air, swinging around as if being used as a club by an invisible giant. Screaming in fear, Jean dropped onto all fours and rushed back to her bedroom, as wallpaper and other things continued to be thrown towards her. So the unforeseen presence in the house had returned, and it was, so it seemed, more aggressive than ever. For some reason, it was focused on Diane's bedroom. What followed next was 9 months of chaos, a peculiar gestation period between which all manner of violent activity was reported. Bangs and thumps would often emanate from Diane's bedroom, and their physically aggressive degree of forced Diane to sleep in her parents' room. Ornaments would be thrown around, and light would be turned off repeatedly, along with the main switchboard. In one instance, all the contents of the family's china cabinet are said to have been thrown out into the floor. Intensification. An incident which is indicated as an increase of the seriousness of the activity saw the lights go out before a huge shadow appeared on a wall. Diane had the privilege to witness this firsthand, up and close and in the hall, while her mother scrambled with a torch to turn the light backs on. As the teenage girl watched on, a hall stand allegedly floated up into the air and paced towards her, tripping her during her escape attempt. Diane had fallen with her back against the staircase. Quickly afterwards, the heavy piece of furniture had fallen on top of her, pinning her against the stairs and holding her in place for the electric sewing machine to fall onto her. When the lights came on and revealed her breathless entrapment, her family rushed to help her and the stand was too heavy for it to be moved. While Joe and Jean heaving and struggled to free their child, Diane seemed to be fine. Fear aside, she showed no signs of being crushed, indicating that the heavy piece of furniture was being held in place by some unseen force. The pressure had just been enough to keep her trapped, but not enough to hurt her. Moments later, the force had adjusted, causing the stand and sewing machine to move away. In addition to this incident, it had been reported that she was tossed from her bed as many as 4 times a night by the unseen entity. Her bedroom became icy cold, and she often told her parents that it felt as though someone was sharing a room with her. On one occasion, as she stood in the living room combing her hair, a brass crucifix apparently leapt from the shelf before striking her in the back. Furthermore, the cross had struck her like a magnet against iron. When the crucifix finally came free, her mother inspected her and found a cross-shaped red mark on her skin between her shoulder blades. The mark supposedly remained for days before disappearing. After being featured in 2 Yorkshire newspapers in September 1968, 30 East Drive earned a haunted local reputation. Locals either actively avoided the house or sought to engage with its alleged paranormal nature. A group of students had their request to camp in the garden rejected before being forced to content themselves with a huge round grass verge in front of the house, where they heard loud bangs and crashes. But with time, the phenomena became usual for the Pritchard family's neighbors, who claimed to experience the activity from inside their own homes, and the noises were simply just too loud. One day, the entire contents of an upstairs room of the house were allegedly thrown out of the windows by an invisible force, thus making it impossible for others in the area to deny the strangeness. Eventually, the family began calling their unwanted house guest Mr. Nobody, and then later, Fred. As much as it tried to force them to leave, the Pritchards remained. Reverend Davy, a local vicar, came to advise the family, telling them that there was something evil in their house and that they should move. Jean, however, refused to act upon the suggestion. The family were determined not to be chased away, not even both Jean and Joe, who both saw a very tall, dim, and hooded figure standing in the doorway of their bedroom. They had been in bed before hearing the door creak open, revealing the terrifying entity. Soon afterwards, others reported seeing a tall figure wearing a long hooded garment as well. That night, scared in their rooms, members of the family also reported hearing loud breathing outside their doors. Thus it was clear that Mr. Nobody, or as he was increasingly known, the monk, was becoming more powerful. One evening when the lights went out, Diane was dragged up the stairs by her throat. The teenage girl's cardigan was stretched out in front of her as if the monk was tugging at it with one hand while his other clutched her neck. Philip and Jean had rushed to pull Diane back down the stairs, but they were both repelled. Strangely, the force let go of its own accord before Diane found herself free. Inspecting the terrified teenager in the light, the family realized that her throat had been bruised with red finger marks. Cessation. While the family didn't want to leave their home, they certainly wanted their tormenting cohabitant to leave. Contacting religious men, praying and sprinkling the interior of the property with holy water only made the activity worse. Multiple exorcisms were performed on the property, but instead of warding off the entity, the rituals infuriated it. Those involved in the exorcisms were reportedly dragged downstairs, slapped, and violently assaulted by the entity. Furthermore, these individuals reported seeing holy water drip down the walls, seemingly originating out of nowhere, and a pair of ghostly hands seemingly mocked them. Eventually, in an act of desperation, the preachers turned towards garlic cloves for help, before the activity dwindled, decreased, and then finally disappeared. That being said, some believe that the paranormal activity in 30 East Drive never ceased. The current owner of the property, through his book, The Black Monk, claims that Mr. Nobody is not a poltergeist, but a demonic entity. To add on, he claims that the paranormal activity in the house never stopped, apparently prevalent even today. The current owner's book puts forth tale after tale and provides photograph after photograph of dark demonic entities, the sort of thing that no one in their right mind would ever want to encounter. Allegedly, the coal house at the property, the dark epicenter of the hellish happenings, inducing scratches and suffocating the sensations of its visitors, the property is now open to paranormal investigators and can be rented from their official website. Foul smells, deafening noises, whispers, light malfunctions, levitating objects, emergence of shadow figures, and physical attacks are commonly reported by the visitors. These accounts, however, haven't reduced the number of people who are skeptical about the haunting. So is this house really haunted? We leave it to your judgment. I can hear baby noises outside my bedroom window in the nighttime. Living in a rural area can be idyllic, but it can also be unsettling, especially at night. As someone who tends to get hot when they sleep, keeping the window open has become a nightly ritual. However, lately, my peaceful nights have been disturbed by an inexplicable and eerie phenomenon. At first, I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the noises persisted, growing louder and more frequent as the night went by. It was always the same sound, babbling and faint baby noises. I tried to record it on my phone, hoping to capture some evidence of what was causing the sounds, but every time I played it back, the noises were too faint to be picked up. What made it even more mysterious is that none of my neighbors had young children. The youngest one was in grade 4, and none of them lived within hearing distance of me. So what could have been causing these sounds? One night my boyfriend stayed over, and I finally had someone to share my unsettling experience with. As we were getting ready for bed, the babbling sounds started up again, louder than ever. My boyfriend could hear it too, and we were both just laying there, frozen in fear and confusion. We tried to rationalize it, thinking it could be a prankster or someone outside with a baby. But who would be outside at 1:30 a.m. in the morning during the winter with a baby, making noises so close to my window? As someone who's lived in this area for a while, I can say with some certainty that it's unlikely anyone that's died here, since it's recently developed. So what could be causing these sounds? Is it a wild animal with vocal abilities that mimic human babies? As the days go by, the sounds continue to unnerve me, and I can't shake off this feeling of unease. Is it possible that something or someone is trying to communicate with me? Or is it something far more sinister and unexplainable? Whatever it is, it continues to remain a mystery, and I can only hope that it'll eventually stop. I used to have odd feelings when I was a kid that weren't real. As I think back to my childhood, there is one memory that stands out above all others. The feeling that everything around me wasn't real. It was a strange and surreal sensation that left me feeling disoriented and scared. I was only 4 or 5 years old, and I couldn't quite understand what was happening to me. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air and feeling like I was trapped in a dream. I would scream out for my mom, begging for her to tell me that everything was real. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in some sort of alternate reality, and it was a feeling that followed me into my teenage years and beyond. As a child, I couldn't articulate what I was feeling, but I now know that I was experiencing panic attacks. I was struggling to come to terms with the concept of existence and the idea that everything around me was real. It was a difficult concept for a young mind to grasp, and it left me feeling lost and scared. As I got older, my fears evolved into something different. I started to feel like I had already lived my life and that everything was happening was just a replay of my past experiences. It was strange and unsettling, and one that I struggled to shake off. I felt like I was old and that I'd already died, and this was all just some sort of twisted afterlife. It was a feeling that was hard to explain, and one that left me feeling even more isolated and alone. I couldn't talk to anybody about what I was feeling. I was too scared to admit that I was struggling with my own existence, and I was worried that people would think I was just crazy. But the fear and anxiety that I was experiencing were real, and they were consuming my life. It wasn't until I sought help that I was able to come to terms with my thoughts and fears. Talking to someone about what I was experiencing was a relief, and it made me realize that I wasn't alone in my struggles. Looking back now, I realize that my experiences were not uncommon. Many people experience similar thoughts and feelings, and it's all part of our human experience, but at the time, it was a terrifying and isolating experience that left me feeling lost and confused. In the end, it was a journey that taught me a lot about myself and the world around me. It made me appreciate the beauty of life and the importance of living in the present moment. And while my fears and anxieties may never fully disappear, I'm grateful for the lessons that they've taught me. I'm having trouble sleeping at night and reading. As I sit here in my house, I can feel the weight of my troubles bearing down upon me. At first, I thought it was simply I was going insane, that my mind was slipping away from me, and I was losing my grip. I questioned my sanity and wondered if I was schizophrenic, but even as I contemplated this possibility, I knew that something was much more sinister. It all started with whispers, faint sounds that I could barely hear at first, but as time passed, they grew louder and more insistent, until they became impossible to ignore. I could hear voices imitating my parents, and strange sounds that I couldn't explain. Every day it seemed like something new was happening in my house, something that made me question my own sanity. I knew that I needed help, but I didn't know where I'd turn. I was too scared to talk to anyone about it. And what was happening to me, I was too afraid of being labeled as crazy. But as the days went by, I realized that I couldn't keep living like this. The floor would creak and crack at odd hours of the day, and I would hear laughter coming from my bedroom, even when I was alone in the house. One night, something whispered out to me, but I couldn't make out what it was saying. It was too faint, too muddled, and I was too terrified to listen any further. I knew that I needed answers, and I couldn't continue to live in fear of whatever was haunting my house. I tried everything to make it stop, but nothing seemed to work. I consulted with experts, tried to cleanse the house, even moved to a different location. Nothing seems to shake this feeling of dread that haunts me day and night. So now, as I sit here and write these words, I'm pleading for anyone to help me. I need answers, I need guidance, and most of all, I need someone to tell me that I'm not crazy. Please, if you know anything that might be happening to me, reach out to me. I'm scared and I don't know how much longer I can take it. The ghosts of the burned house. For the past decade, I've been experiencing something that I can only describe as clairvoyance. While I can't see every little detail of future events, I get these strange twitches and flashes of words and images that seem to be foretelling what's to come. At times, these mental visualizations can be so vivid that they send me into a state of extreme panic. When I first started experiencing these episodes, they were so rare that I hardly paid them any attention. However, as time went by, they began to occur more frequently, happening every other week or so. And with each new occurrence, I find myself becoming increasingly apprehensive about what the future holds. The most recent episode happened just last night. It was particularly distressing. I saw myself in the midst of an argument. While I can't be sure of all the details, I can assume who it was with. What's troubling is that I don't know if there's any way to stop it from happening. The whole experience left me felt incredibly isolated and alone. I tried to talk to others about it, but most people are skeptical or dismissive, writing it off as more coincidence or paranoia. I'm left to wonder if I'm the only person who's experienced these episodes, and if there's any way to control them or even use them to my advantage. Perhaps there's a reason for this gift, and it's up to me to figure out how to harness it. Or perhaps it's a curse, and I'm doomed to live a life in a perpetual state of anxiety and fear, always dreading the next time, and twitches when the visions come true. Whatever the case may be, I'm determined to find answers and discover the truth behind the strange and unsettling phenomenon. Sometimes I can see the future. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it happened over 30 years ago when I was living in San Diego de Chile, the capital city of my country. Something happened to me that left me shaken to the core, made me realize that sometimes the consequences of our actions can be more than we bargained for. In those days, there was a burned house near my apartment that the people in the neighborhood often talked about. It was said that 2 young addict punks had died in a fire while trying to escape, only to burn alive. The story was a tragic one and left a sense of unease and fear in the air. One night during the winter months, I was walking home when I passed by the burned house. I looked through the boarded-up window, and in a moment of sheer stupidity, decided to say, "Hello, is anybody in there?" I whispered, and then I waited. Of course, nothing happened at that moment, and I continued to walk to my apartment. I lived on the second floor of an old house that had Victorian stairs, and as I closed the door behind me and started walking up the stairs, I could feel someone walking behind me. It was as if they were sticking to my back, and I could hear their footsteps just a second after mine. I was terrified, but I kept walking normally, not wanting to show any fear. Then I felt it. The person behind me was breathing on my neck, literally breathing. I was overcome with panic, but I kept calm and reminded myself that a gentleman just walks, never runs. I continued up the stairs until I reached my door, and when I opened it quickly and closed it without turning my head, I saw it. It moved like a man, but it was breathing very loudly and freakishly. I never played a joke on the dead again in my entire life. The experience left me shaken, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I crossed a line. Looking back now, I realized that what happened to me was a warning, a reminder that our actions have consequences. It made me realize that we should always be respectful of the dead, and that sometimes even the smallest actions can have a huge impact. The incident stayed with me for years, haunting me in my dreams and making me wonder about the afterlife. It was a reminder that there are things beyond our understanding that are sometimes best to be left alone. Something was in my kitchen last night. Last night was supposed to be a simple dinner for me and my husband, a night of bonding over a home-cooked meal. I decided to use my pressure cooker to prepare the food, which usually makes for a quick and easy meal. After serving my husband, I lift the lid off the pot to let it cool off. It wasn't until around 10 p.m. when I started cleaning up the kitchen that I placed the lid back on the pot and left it on the counter. Fast forward a few hours later, it's around 2 in the morning, and my husband and I are in bed, talking. Suddenly, we hear a loud noise coming from the kitchen, like something had fallen. I sent my husband and our dog to investigate, and our dog started softly barking, as if she sensed something. But after a while, they hadn't returned, so I decided to check it out myself. To my surprise, the lid of the pressure cooker was laying across the kitchen floor. I was bewildered as to how it had gotten there, considering that there was no pressure built up in the pot. And even if there was, the valve was open to release any excess pressure. The entire incident had me questioning if there was something else at play. Today, I called my mother and shared the story with her. She mentioned similar occurrences happening to her in her own home, but she had learned to ignore them as she was quite sensitive to the supernatural and paranormal. She even asked me if I'd seen anything paranormal in my house, to which I replied, "I've seen shadows around my home, but never sensed anything bad." My mother tried to calm me down by saying that those shadows could be shadow people, and sometimes they do things like this. But it still left me feeling uneasy. Have any of you experienced anything similar? It's a strange and unsettling feeling to think that there could be something beyond our own understanding at play, right? My kids report discomfort in one bedroom of our home. Throughout my life, I've encountered countless instances of paranormal activity, but none have perplexed me more than at my current abode. This is the one home where I don't experience any eerie occurrences, which makes the experience of my family members all the more bizarre. About a year ago, my 11-year-old son was staying in one of our rooms and he refused to sleep there. He wouldn't even hang out there during the day. He reported experiencing nightmares, feelings of being watched, hearing strange noises, and even seeing unexplainable things at night. To put his mind at ease, we changed his room, and he's been fine ever since. I casually mentioned this to my 14-year-old daughter, who now stays in that room, and she immediately responded, "Oh, I know exactly why." She proceeded to tell me about seeing a person in her room, hearing things talking to her, hearing knocking under her bed, feeling of being watched and experiencing nightmares. A few months ago, we attempted to bunk my 4-year-old daughter in the same room with her older sister, but it was a colossal failure. She wouldn't sleep and begged for the door to stay open and frequently woke up with nightmares in the middle of the night. Despite being the head of the household, I don't experience any of these eerie occurrences. I've checked all the outlets and fixtures for electromagnetic field dumps, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I've ordered white sage and Palo Santo, but I'm at a loss as for what I should do. Recently, my daughter emerged from her room claiming that she heard me yelling to her. However, I was sitting in a quiet room scrolling through TikTok. This incident has left me feeling perplexed as I'm not sure what to make of it. So my fellow readers, what are your thoughts and advice on how to deal with this paranormal activity? Do you know God? A strange encounter last night. Last night, I decided to head out to pick up some smokes from a local shop. The shop was situated at the end of a Walmart parking lot with no other businesses nearby. As I drove into the parking lot, the sun had already set, and the dimly lit surroundings gave me a little bit of an eerie feeling. I tried to shake it off and I proceeded to park a few feet away from the shop's entrance. As I walked toward the shop, I noticed a young man standing outside. He'd appeared to be maybe in his early 20s and he had a huge grin on his face. It was evident that he was high, and I could tell from his red eyes and slurred speech. Initially, I paid him no mind and continued walking to the shop and grabbed my smokes. After I got my stuff, I turned to leave the shop and I was greeted by the same young man. He was still standing outside and the grin on his face had only grown wider. I tried to avoid any interaction with him and began walking to my car. However, he spoke up and said, "Jesus loves you, sir." I ignored him and continued walking toward my car, but he wasn't done yet. He followed me and asked, "Do you know God?" By then, I was starting to feel uneasy and just wanted to get into my car and leave. I quickly got in the car, locked the door, and looked out the window to make sure the young man wasn't following me. As I looked out the window, I was surprised to see that he had vanished into thin air. It was as if he had never even been there in the first place. I scanned the parking lot, but nowhere to be seen. I even looked back at the door of the vape shop, and it appeared that it had not even been opened since I left. The whole encounter was extremely bizarre. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was totally off. Who was that young man, and how did he disappear so quickly? It was a strange and unsettling experience that left me with more questions than answers.